Welcome to Local is Lekker, where we look for local businesses with a lekker story. And today I'm visiting a guest house, which also served as my accommodation on a recent trip to Mpumalanga and the Pongola Valley. I stayed with Johnny and Gudrun at their guest house, Dusk to Dawn, which is halfway between Joburg and I think Sodwana. It's probably the best description. And as you can see, there's a lovely little donkey in the background, born last night. And Johnny's got a little farm, what he calls Johnny's Ark, a little old MacDonald's farm where he keeps all the traditional animals that he grew up with, and in fact we also grew up with them. And it's wonderful to see this heritage project with those old pigs, Muscovy ducks, all the stuff that I haven't seen since my childhood. Johnny has preserved, I guess, in memory of his childhood. And it's been a wonderful stay here at Dusk to Dawn. And I hope I can come back one day to do a little story about Gudrun and how she started this guest house. But this time I spent time with my cousin Johnny, talking about his farm and his passion for old style farm animals, I guess. And I can recommend staying at Dusk to Dawn.
Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-ho, and on his farm he had a cow, E-I-E-I-ho, moo-moo here and a moo-moo there. Old MacDonald had a cow, E-I-E-I-ho. Now I'm going to pour some of the milk into these bottles, where I'm busy rearing 2 of my beef calves that lost their mother, and we'll be seeing the feeding just now. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-ho. Having grown up on our family farm, Tambukispult, in the Lunaburg area, I had the fortune of being part of farm life, and farm animals have always played an intricate part in my life. I've got a boy and a girl here, the boy on my left, the girl on my right. Oh, hopefully they will grow out and end up in my beef herd. As a kid, I used to have all sorts of pets. I had a pony, she was called Ruby. I had my birthday present on my 7th birthday was a little Dexter calf, which unfortunately died. That's why I'm keeping Dexter cattle now, all bringing back childhood memories. We kept chickens, rabbits, hamsters, horses. So animals have always been part of my life. After school, I was able to continue studying agriculture and animal husbandry at the University of Natal in Johannesburg. And soon after, yes, the great privilege to join my in-laws with my beautiful wife Gudrun on this farm Wagendrift. And ever since, farm animals have been my passion. Okay, old MacDonald is on his way to feed the rest of his animals, having milked the cows. Got some chickens, some pigs. So old old MacDonald had some geese, hee-ya-hee-ya-ho. And on his farm he had some geese, hee-ya-hee-ya-ho. And old MacDonald had some pigs, hee-ya-hee-ya-ho. And on his farm he had some pigs, hee-ya-hee-ya-ho. Some piggies here and some piggies there. Old MacDonald had some pigs, hee-ya-hee-ya-hoo. And old MacDonald had some chickens, hee-ya-hee-ya-ho. As you see these little pens, this is an idea I got on the internet, and a guy I've been following for a long time is Joel Salatin, a crazy farmer in America, who's written a lot about organic farming and also offers courses on organic farming. He started the whole idea of chicken tractors. This is the principle here where the chickens are in a movable pen, and this pen is then moved on a daily basis depending on the availability of green grass. We're in the middle of winter, so we can't really see the principle operating, but the idea is to move this pen along on a daily basis so that the chickens would have fresh green grass to supplement their diet, and then in the end one could rear one's own broiler chickens. In my case, I'm just using the roosters, the male chickens of my laying hens, which are also just a mix of breeds. Most of them are Bushveld chickens, which is an indigenous breed that was developed here in South Africa. So I've started applying the principle also to my pigs, making a piggy tractor out of these pens. So the whole idea is that the pigs will also have a fresh patch every day, and while they're in that portion they'll be digging and they will be turning the soil, in this way preparing a field for planting crops. So I intend planting some maize meal behind these pens in this coming summer. The area will be fenced off, and I'll be able to grow some sweet corn in the area that has been prepared for me by my pigs. Here on our farm we also run a guest house, the Dusk to Dawn Farm Guesthouse, and we regularly get tour groups to spend a day with us and a night, and one of the tour operators that has been involved with us for many years, they mainly bring in tourists from Germany. Many instances these are also people who are interested in agriculture, and they normally do a farm tour looking at the commercial farm. And this is just another example of a chicken tractor in a grand style. On one of the visits, the group had an accident with their trailer just as they turned off into our farm. A car overtook on the right hand side and smashed into the trailer. The trailer was a write-off, so it's been turned into a chicken tractor. Same principle applies. I took out the floor, put in some welded mesh. You can see the nesting boxes, and the chickens are free to roam around in the pasture, and then of course lay their eggs in the nest boxes. That's fresh eggs for the tourists every morning. I've always been involved in community work, and some years back we tried to start a little agricultural school where we would teach the local small-scale farmers on how to become self-sufficient and self-subsistent. And the whole idea was to teach them on the basics, growing vegetables, but also keeping some farm animals, especially some pigs and some chicken. And the idea was to do this in a way which would basically cost them nothing, because that's a big problem here in our area, that there's a lot of unemployment, and a lot of people have access to land where they live on the farms, and they could all become self-subsistent. The idea is to take a piece of land and then to start collecting dry material, grass, leaves and everything, and put it onto this area. First of all, fencing it off in whichever way they're able to do, and then start working on this area. By collecting the leafy material and grass, this would build up some organic matter and eventually prepare the soil for growing some vegetables and maize in most cases. So that project in the end failed, but I've tried to model this project here with my little animal wheel or garden wheel in a similar fashion as explained. First of all, we would collect some dry material, put it into one compartment of this wheel. That would be followed by some pigs. The pigs would be working on this material. They would start digging in the ground, working the material into the soil. The pigs would be followed by some chickens. I've got my Bushveld chickens scratching around and depositing the dung, and also mixing all the material on the surface. So once all the organic matter has been worked into the soil, this forms a perfect seed bed to plant some vegetables. You can see here some newly planted cauliflower and some cabbages. The first 3 rows have been planted with beans and peas. The only thing that will grow now in winter. Right, and just following the wheel, we will see this growing of the vegetables in a more advanced stage. And already having supplied or provided some good nutritious veggies for a family, the hens keep on laying eggs, and sooner or later one of the pigs will become some homemade bacon and lovely meat to braai. The whole idea is then to keep on putting dead leafy material on this patch even while the veggies are growing. This helps in keeping away the weeds and also in keeping the soil moist. So once the vegetables have been harvested, the pigs that will be coming into this portion of my wheel would be turning all of the rest of material, any leftovers of the vegetables and the grassy material back into the soil. That again will be followed by chickens, and that would be the beginning of the whole cycle again, following that with some summer crops in this instance, where we'll be planting all sorts of different kinds of vegetables. Here we can see the nest boxes. The chickens have their access to that portion that is open through that little opening. They come and lay their eggs during the day. They have some access to laying mesh and also have access to whatever they can find in the patch that they are spending their daytime in. You can see some chickens that have already come in to lay their eggs. The rooster, proud of his ladies, giving a talk. The whole principle is based on what is called Farming God's Way. This is an organization that has been started here in South Africa in the Eastern Cape by Grant Dryden, and he is implementing this kind of farming, God's farming, all over Africa, in America as well. The whole idea is to copy nature, to do what God does in nature. If we look at the system, for instance in the Serengeti, where we have grassy plains and then herds of wildebeest and gazelles and zebra passing through this once a year, thereby flattening the grassy material with the dung and urine, depositing nitrogen back onto the soil, and then moving to a new patch every day. In the same way, this is what we're trying to do here as well in Farming God's Way, by preparing a very organic, rich layer on top of the soil, which is then eventually used as the planting medium where we grow our vegetables in. In the Serengeti, the animals would then return after a whole year, so we need a long period of rest for the leafy material to decompose and to nourish the soil. The same applies here in my wagon wheel, is that once the vegetable crop has been harvested, similar to the animals grazing the grass in the Serengeti, this would be followed by my pigs, who also then deposit their own dung and urine and work all the dry material into the soil, followed by the chickens, who continue doing the gardening for me by preparing the soil, which will then be ready after a period of rest to grow some more vegetables. The Farming God's Way system has been implemented in rural areas where it is an aid to help people to become self-subsistent. The difference to what is done in Farming God's Way is that I have now introduced the animal factor into this, and to my mind that perfects the whole system, really duplicating what is happening in the Serengeti. After having visited Fairview and the Cape, this idea was born to build my own goat tower. It was all made from old material, the long posts. Yeah, I probably shouldn't say this, but they're all old telephone posts that were removed along our farm road after telecom was no longer usable. Yeah, and some poles here and there and some planks, and this is old MacDonald or Johnny's Ark's famous goat tower. Old MacDonald had some peacocks, hee-haw, Old MacDonald had some Muscovy ducks, hee-haw. Muscovy ducks make a good dish. So also just something that's not very often seen. Our visitors, our tourists can be exposed to all sorts of different farm animals, kind of animals we as farm kids all grew up with, and this is something that has stayed in my mind and always takes me back many years when I as a kid went feeding all the animals with my grandmother. That's unforgettable memories, and somehow all of this got stuck, and I've now got my own little farm where I can do these things. The 3 fat pigs here are a good example of what one would have found in the early days on every farm. In Zulu we used to call them kotofanes, but this is what has now been developed into a heritage breed called the Colebrook. It's said that during the early days of sea voyages, when ships were shipwrecked, some of the animals on board survived and then disappeared in the wilderness. So the old settlers were all keeping a pig or two in the yard to feed all the kitchen waste to them, and of course also for meat. Pig was normally slaughtered in winter. The fat, as you can see, there's a big layer of fat, was used for making soap, and of course the meat was then processed with our German heritage. There we would make some metwurst, as well as some good pig braaiwors, as well as bacon and whatever one could process out of the delicious meat. Of course, families with kids visiting our farm, they have access to my ark and they can partake in all of these activities, feeding the chickens, collecting some eggs, feeding the pigs, milking the cow, feeding the calves with a bottle. A real kid's paradise. Chickens lay their eggs in the morning up until lunchtime. So normally by midday you can go and collect your eggs. Try to get them into the basket as soon as possible before any vermin or other animals get to them. During winter, chickens normally lose their feathers and stop laying eggs. That's all got to do with the length of day, and as the days get longer they start laying again, and so in winter you might run short of some eggs, but it's good to have some young pullets starting to lay just before winter. They will carry on laying without losing their feathers. Yeah, those eggs, all freshly laid, will be served to our guests. MacDonald had a farm, E-O-E-O-ho, and on his farm he had a tractor, E-O-E-O-ho, rum rum rum, rum rum rum, here rum, rum rum rum, old MacDonald had a farm. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-O-E-O-ho, and on his farm he had some donkeys, E-O-E-O-ho. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-O-E-O-ho, and on his farm he had some horses, E-O-E-O-ho. Sun is setting, but the farmer's work never ends. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-O-E-O-ho, and on his farm I don't think he had alpacas, E-O-E-O-ho. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-O-E-O-ho. Baby alpacas are called crias. Our little black cria was born about a week ago. Oh, these alpacas are the latest addition to Johnny's ark. Alpacas come from South America, Peru, but they've been introduced all over the world as farm animals. They're also are used as guard dogs amongst sheep and cattle farmers. They are very aggressive and protective and would protect a flock of sheep against any intruders. They're a big hit with our guests. When we do have guests, I can feed them. Now, part of my kitchen garden, I need some compost. Compost is the best way of making cheap fertilizer. In order to make good compost, you need a carbon source, which would be in the form of dry grassy material or dry leaves, even cardboard, anything that is of a carbon nature, and then nitrogen source. That can be in the form of green leafy material, or then of course dung. You can see on this compost heap I've added some of the alpaca manure. Alpaca manure is known to be very good to be used in your garden or even then in your compost heap. I also collect the chicken manure from my hens and put it onto this compost heap. And eventually, through the process of heating up, killing off all harmful bacteria, you end up with a very fertile and very good source to use as compost in your garden. So once again, it's something you can do without it costing you a cent, and you can build up a reserve of compost which you can then always add to your garden. There are different ways of making compost. If you want to speed up the process, you would be turning this heap regularly after about 6 weeks, and then that just helps the process to move on much quicker. But leaving it as a static pile, it will also eventually end up being some good compost. You can see once everything has been decomposed, you end up with beautiful compost, nice smelling, and this is ideal for any vegetable farmer to add into his garden. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of our farm. Farm is called Johannesburg, and the name comes from the old hunting road which passed over the farm and crossed the Mkunyana River, or our White River, at the bottom of our farm, and hence it was called the Johannesburg. That is where the old hunters would come through, coming from Natal to hunt in the lowveld of Swaziland. This farm was bought in 1958 by my in-laws when they moved over from the original family farm, and they started farming on this farm. There was absolutely nothing on this farm, and they built this up over their generation. I was fortunate to marry Gudrun, the third daughter of my in-laws, Heinz and Helga Filter, and we moved onto the farm in 1990. And have been able to continue with the development of this farm and living a beautiful life on this beautiful spot of earth. Yeah, in 1993 we started with our guest house because we are located in a perfect spot, very close to the N2, coming from Johannesburg, Pretoria, going down to the north coast. So we saw that as a niche market where we could then accommodate tourists traveling on this route, and to make this a halfway stop. For that reason, we then also called our guest house Dusk to Dawn Guest House, or Farm Guest House, because our guests will then normally arrive in the late afternoon, spend the night with us, have a gorgeous breakfast, and then in the morning, well, just after dawn, leave again for their next destination. Over the years, we've had many foreign tourists also visiting us, and we are enjoying the interaction that we have with foreign tourists, and especially with families and kids, and that is where my ark, Johnny's Ark, the animal farm, is a big draw card and a hit, where kids can enjoy themselves and really enjoy farm life and to bring them back to nature. For more information about our guest house, you can find us on our webpage. We welcome anybody to come and visit us.